The wind that night didn't just carry snow. It carried voices. Faint, desperate, and human. Edward Lansing rose from his chair by the hearth, setting down the battered book he'd been pretending to read. The storm outside howled against the shutters, shaking his little cabin like it meant to rip it from the earth. He hadn't heard another living soul for weeks. The world beyond that door was nothing but snow, silence, and ghosts. He told himself the voices were tricks of the wind, until he heard it again. A woman's cry. Edward reached for his rifle. The metal felt cold and honest in his hands. He stepped toward the door, pausing only to glance at the small wooden frame on the mantel, a faded portrait of a woman and child. His wife, Mary, and their baby girl, lost the cholera that took London in '68. He'd come to America after burying them, looking for distance, maybe redemption. Mostly, he found emptiness. But that voice outside, there was no mistaking it. He shoved the door open. The wind slammed against him like a wall of ice. The snow came sideways, thick enough to blind a man. But there, half buried near the tree line, a wagon lay on its side. One wheel splintered, horse frozen in harness. And beside it, 4 figures. He trudged through the drifts, the wind slicing at his face. When he reached them, he dropped to his knees. A woman clutched 3 small children to her chest, all wrapped in torn blankets. Their lips were blue. One of the children stirred weakly. "Ma'am!" Edward shouted over the storm. "Can you hear me?" The woman lifted her head. Snow caked her lashes. "Please," she whispered, voice brittle as glass. "They can't." Her words broke off. Edward didn't think. He acted. He grabbed the smallest child, a girl maybe 7 years old, and motioned for the woman to follow. She tried to stand but stumbled. He slung her arm over his shoulder and carried her toward the cabin, the other 2 children stumbling behind. By the time he kicked the door shut behind them, the storm had swallowed the world outside. Inside, the warmth of the fire filled the room with a dull orange glow. Edward laid the children on a bearskin rug and stripped the soaked blankets away. They were painfully thin, skin like paper, ribs visible. He poured water into a pot, dropped in the last of his dried meat, and set it to boil. The woman sat near the fire, shaking violently. She looked to be in her early 30s, though the hardship had carved deeper lines into her face. Her hair was matted with ice, her dress torn. Edward knelt beside her. "You're safe here," he said. "I'll fetch dry clothes." She didn't answer. Her eyes darted toward the windows, then back to the children. One of them, a boy, stirred and mumbled, "Mama, they're coming." The words hit Edward like a slap. The woman's head snapped toward the child. "Hush now," she said quickly. "No one's coming, Samuel. Rest." Edward frowned but said nothing. He gave them broth once it was warm enough, spooning it carefully into the smallest girl's mouth. She drank greedily, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. When the woman finally spoke, her voice trembled with exhaustion. "Thank you, we'd have died out there." "Name's Edward Lansing," he said. "You from one of the settlements?" She hesitated. "We were traveling north. Our wagon broke. My husband," she looked down, "he's gone." "I'm sorry," Edward said softly. She only nodded, eyes distant. The storm raged through the night. Edward gave them blankets, stoked the fire, and sat awake while they slept. Every now and then, one of the children whimpered. He could feel their fear as if it were alive in the room. When he finally drifted into uneasy sleep, his dreams were filled with the cries of a child he could no longer hold. Morning came pale and brittle. The snow outside lay thick over the land, the horizon gone white. Edward made coffee and found the woman standing by the window, staring out. "Name?" he asked. "Clara," she said without turning. "Clara Mayfield." "And the little ones?" "Samuel, Sadie, and Sarah. Triplets." A faint smile ghosted her lips. "That's what the midwife called them. Never thought I'd see the day when I wished they weren't." Edward studied her face. There was beauty under the weariness, a soft strength, like a tree that had weathered too many storms and still stood. But her eyes carried something dark. Fear or guilt? Maybe both. He cleared his throat. "You can rest here a few days." I'll see if I can find game. When the weather breaks, I'll take you to the next town." Her expression changed. Alarm flickered across her face. "No," she said sharply. "We can't go to town." "Why not?" "They'll find us." Edward's brow furrowed. "Who will—" She turned away, hugging herself. "Please, Mr. Lansing, don't ask." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Samuel, the boy, said from his seat near the fire, "Mama said bad men want us. But you can shoot, can't you, mister?" Edward blinked. The question felt too heavy for a child's mouth. "I can shoot," he said carefully. The boy nodded, satisfied. "Then they can't hurt us no more." Clara hushed him again, voice tight. Edward caught her hand, trembling as she did. That afternoon, he went to chop firewood. The rhythm helped settle his thoughts, though the words, their coming, echoed in his head with every swing of the axe. He couldn't tell if it was paranoia or instinct, but he found himself checking the tree lean more than once. When he came back, Clara was tending the fire. She'd found his sewing kit and was mending the tear in his coat. "You don't have to do that," he said. "It helps keep my hands busy." She looked up briefly. "You've been alone out here long?" 5 years. Give or take." "Why?" He hesitated, then said, "Because I was tired of watching people die." She nodded slowly. "Then you know how it feels." The words sat between them, heavy and unspoken. By evening, the storm had thinned to a slow drift of snowflakes. The children ate better, color returning to their cheeks. Edward felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, maybe. He found himself smiling when little Sadie gave him a small stone she'd found in her pocket. "It's lucky," she said solemnly. He closed his fingers around it. "Then I'll keep it close." When the fire burned low, Clara moved to sit beside him. For the first time, she seemed less guarded. "Thank you for helping us," she said softly. Most men would have turned away. "I nearly did," he admitted. "But I reckon the good Lord wouldn't let me sleep if I did." She smiled faintly. "Maybe he sent you." Edward stared into the flames. "Or maybe he's testing me again." They fell into quiet, the kind of silence that feels almost fragile. Then, from the corner, Sarah stirred and whispered, "Mama, will they find us here?" Clara froze. Edward looked between them. "Who?" No answer. Only the wind outside, whispering against the walls like something alive. That night, Edward lay awake long after the others slept. The children's breathing was soft, rhythmic. Clara's form was still beneath the blanket. He stared at the rafters and thought of London, of rain on cobblestones, of his wife's laughter. The ache in his chest returned like an old wound. Then, creak. He sat up. Someone was moving near the fire. Clara. She stood in her nightdress, holding his rifle. Edward rose slowly, hands open. Something wrong. Her eyes were wide, haunted. "I was just checking if it was loaded." He nodded, watching her carefully. "You expecting someone?" Her fingers tightened on the gun. Then she lowered it and handed it back. "You should always know where your bullets are," she said quietly, "just in case." Edward didn't press. He took the rifle, set it by the wall, and watched her return to her place. The snow outside had stopped. The world was too quiet. When he finally dozed off, he dreamed of hoofbeats, steady, distant, drawing closer. The next morning dawned gray. Edward stepped outside to fetch water. The world looked pure, untouched. Yet the hair on the back of his neck prickled. Tracks, faint, half buried in snow. Not animal. Boot prints, 3 sets, coming from the South Ridge. He followed them a few paces before they vanished under fresh snow. His stomach tightened. When he returned, Clara was awake, eyes on the door. "What did you see?" she asked. "Nothing," he lied, but she seemed to know. By noon, the sky had turned pale as bone. Edward chopped again, but his mind wasn't in it. Something was coming. He felt it. Inside, Clara sat with the children, humming a lullaby under her breath, a sound both sad and comforting. The kind of song you sing to keep the darkness away. As dusk settled, the cabin filled with the soft glow of firelight. Edward watched the triplets huddled together, whispering among themselves. Their innocence made the fear in the room even sharper. Then Sarah, the quietest one, rose and went to the window. "Sarah," Edward said gently, "come sit back down." She didn't move. Her small hand pressed the glass. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mama, they're coming." Clara's head snapped up. "What did you say?" The girl pointed. Edward crossed the room and looked out. At first, he saw nothing but snow and a long stretch of open plain. Then movement. Faint shapes, 5 of them, emerging to the curtain of white. Horses, riders, each one carrying a torch that burned orange against the dusk. The flame light flickered across the snow like the eyes of something hungry. Edward's hand went instinctively to his rifle. Behind him, Clara whispered, "Dear God, they found us." The triplets began to cry softly. Edward's voice was low, steady, the soldier in him rising again after years of sleep. "Get the children below." "Cellar, now." Clara hesitated. "You can't fight them alone." He glanced at her, eyes hard. "I can buy you time." Then he looked out again. 5 dark riders moving slow, deliberate, toward his cabin to the dying light. The snowflakes fell between them like ashes from a burning sky. And for the first time in years, Edward Lansing felt alive again. The riders didn't come that night. They circled. Edward could hear the horses snorting in the dark, the creak of leather, the crunch of hooves on snow. Then silence. No knock. No words. Just the slow scrape of fear crawling through his bones. He kept his rifle close and his eyes open until dawn, while Clara and the children huddled in the cellar below, the air thick with their trembling breaths. When morning light finally touched the frosted windows, the riders were gone. Only 5 sets of hoof prints carved through the snow like scars leading north. Edward stood at the window, jaw tight. He knew men like that, ghosts in daylight, wolves at night. Behind him, Clara's voice was a whisper. "They know where we are now." He turned. "Who are they?" Clara didn't answer. She stood in the middle of the room, arms wrapped around herself, eyes hollow. "Tell me," he pressed. She looked up. "If I tell you, you'll throw us out." Edward set the rifle down. "Try me?" The words came haltingly at first, like stones dragged through mud. "My husband's name is Jeb Mayfield," she said. "He led a gang. Bounty hunters, they called themselves. But they were nothing but killers for hire. They took contracts from the railroad, from ranchers, anyone who could pay." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "When he found out I was taking the children and leaving, he said I was stealing from him. He said the triplets were his property." Edward's stomach tightened. "And those men outside, his lieutenants, Burke, Mace Cobb, Slater, and Red Tom, the worst kind of devils. Jeb sent them after me to make an example." Edward's fingers brushed the edge of the table, knuckles white. "An example?" Clara's eyes filled. "He told them to bring back the children alive. And me, however they pleased." The words hung heavy in the small cabin. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves. Edward felt something old and violent stir in him, the same dark thing that once guided him through war. "You should have kept riding," he said. "I tried, but the snow came faster than I could run. The wagon broke." Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to bring this to your door." Edward took a slow breath. "You did what you had to do. Now we do what must be done." That day, Edward began preparing for war. He reinforced the shutters with timber planks and nailed iron scraps over the windows. He cut firing slits into the logs, 2 at the front, 1 at the back. Clara watched silently, helping where she could. She loaded bullets while the triplets gathered what food was left. The air inside the cabin thickened with a tense purpose. As Edward worked, he explained his plan in that same low, steady tone soldiers use when fear mustn't show. "They'll come from a ridge," he said. "Always attack downhill for cover. If we keep low, we can hold them off till dark." Clara hesitated. "You've done this before?" "Too many times." Later, when the preparations were done, they sat by the fire. The triplets had fallen asleep, curled together like kittens under a blanket. Clara handed Edward a cup of coffee. Her hands were rough from cold, but steady. Where'd you learn to fight? She asked. England, he said. Crimean War. Then Pinkerton work in New York. You left all that? He nodded. Left everything. She looked at him quietly, then said, You didn't leave. You just ran from ghosts that follow anyway. Her words landed deep. He didn't reply. The only sound was the fire popping, the wind brushing the walls like cautious fingers. After a while, Clara whispered, I used to think Jeb loved me. Before the liquor and the gold fever took him, he said I was his good luck charm. Edward glanced at her, and when the luck ran out, he turned mean, broke my ribs once. I stayed because of the children. Then I saw what he made them watch, and I ran. Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. You think less of me now? Edward shook his head slowly. No, ma'am. I think you're still standing. She smiled faintly, tired, grateful. That's more than I can say for most men. By dusk, the first shot came. A rifle cracked through the cold air, splintering a hole through the top window shutter. The sound echoed like thunder across the plain. Edward shouted, Down! And pushed Clara to the floor. Another shot. The back window shattered. He crawled to the firing slit, sighted his rifle, and fired once, clean, precise. A distant scream followed. They're here, he said grimly. The triplets cried out. Clara pulled him under the table. Gunfire erupted again. Bullets thudded into the logs, sending splinters flying. Smoke filled the air, choking and hot. Edward moved from window to window, firing, ducking, reloading. The sharp smell of gunpowder mixed with the tang of burning wood. Then silence. He peered through the slit. One of the attackers lay in the snow, motionless, for torches still burned behind the tree-lean. Reload, he told Clara. Her hands shook but obeyed. She passed him another rifle. From the darkness outside, a voice called, We know you're in there. Englishman! You picked the wrong woman to save. Edward fired toward the voice, his bullet sparking against a rock. And you picked the wrong cabin to attack. A harsh laugh echoed. You got spirit, foreigner, Jeblin joy breaking it. Edward's jaw tightened. He'll have to climb over me first. When the shooting stopped, one man lay bleeding near the front steps. Edward dragged him inside, rifle ready. The man was young, no more than 25, with a face too soft for the things he'd done. The smell of blood hit the air. Clara turned away, pale. Edward crouched over the wounded man. Who sent you? The outlaw coughed, blood flecking his lips. Jeb Mayfield. He's coming at dawn with more men. How many? Enough to burn this place to the ground. Edward's voice went cold. Why? The outlaw smiled weakly. Jeb don't like being made a fool. Said the woman and kids die first. He wants you alive. Says you'll learn what happens when a man meddles in another man's property. Edward felt the rage rise like fire under his skin. The outlaw's hand twitched, reaching for a hidden knife. Edward shot him through the chest without hesitation. The echo of the gunshot lingered. Clara flinched. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, Edward said flatly. He'd have gutted us both. The children began to cry again. Clara pulled them close, whispering softly, but her voice trembled. When Edward looked at her, there was something different in his eyes. A darkness, a resolve. He cleaned the rifle, reloaded, and stared out the window. Dawn, then, he said quietly. The night stretched long and silent. The fire burned low, shadows moving across the walls like ghosts. Edward sat awake, back against the door, rifle in his lap. Clara dozed fitfully beside the children. Every now and then, Edward's gaze drifted toward her. The curve of her shoulders, the quiet strength in her sleeping face. He wondered how someone could endure so much pain and still protect others. He thought of Mary again, his wife's laughter, the smell of lilac in spring, their daughter's tiny hands. The memories came like knives, sharp and merciless. He looked toward Clara and felt something shift inside him, not love, not yet, but a deep ache, a reason to fight. When the fire popped, he flinched. His nerves were stretched thin as barbed wire. Outside, the wind carried faint sounds, metal clinking, a horse snorting. Distant voices, low and cruel. He rose, moving to the window. Shapes moved at the edge of the forest. 5 torches again, but behind them more, twice as many. They brought reinforcements. He woke Clara. "They're here." She blinked, groggy. "It's not dawn yet." "They came early." The color drained from her face. "How many?" "Too many." She swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Edward's voice was calm, deliberate. "We fight. We hold. And if the walls fall, we run north through the creek bed. It's narrow, they can't follow fast." Clara nodded, eyes glistening. "And the children?" "They stay close to me. Always." He handed her a pistol. She looked at it like it was a serpent, then closed her fingers around the grip. The triplets were awake now, wide-eyed, trembling. Samuel asked, "Are they coming again?" Edward crouched, meeting his gaze. "Yes, but we'll stop them." "Like in your war?" the boy asked. Edward almost smiled. "Exactly like that." He turned back to the window. The torches were moving closer. Snow fell again, thin and steady, turning the world ghostly white. One rider raised a lantern and shouted, "Clara Mayfield! Bring the brats out, and maybe we'll let the Englishman keep his head." Edward whispered, "Keep low." The first volley of shots shattered the night. Glass exploded. Wood splintered. Bullets tore through the shutters. Edward fired back, fast and precise. One man fell from his horse. Another howled. The air filled with the crack of rifles and the screams of men and horses. Smoke thickened. The fire roared higher. Clara knelt beside the children, reloading tremblingly, passing rifles back to Edward. Then a bullet tore through the wall inches from her face. She ducked, gasping. "Down!" Edward barked. The onslaught felt endless. Gunfire, shouting, then the deep quiet of reloading, breath held, pulse pounding. At last, the gunfire faded. The surviving attackers retreated into the tree-line. Edward exhaled, chest heaving. Clara looked at him, eyes wide. "Did we win?" He shook his head. "No, that was just a warning." He stepped outside into the bitter air, rifle ready. The wounded outlaw's body lay twisted near the steps. Snow drifted over him, already erasing the face. Edward stared at the horizon. Dawn was a smear of gray light. He could feel it in his bones. The real storm was still coming. Inside, Clara tucked the children into a corner, rocking them gently. "It's almost over," she whispered, though she knew it wasn't true. Samuel looked up at her, voice barely a whisper. "Mama, I heard them again." Her arms tightened around him. "Heard what, sweetheart?" He pointed toward the door. The laughing men. Outside, faint and distant, came the sound of spurs jingling, slow, deliberate, and a cruel laughter rolling through the cold morning air. Edward lifted his rifle, eyes narrowing. The frost had thickened over the valley by the time dawn rolled its pale hand across the horizon. James awoke to a sound, soft, uncertain. At first, he thought it was the wind whistling through the loose boards of the cabin. But then he heard it again, closer, sharper, a whisper. "Mr. Harrow, they're here." He turned toward the doorway. It was Lily, her face ghost pale in the firelight. Behind her, the triplets clung together, eyes wide as frightened deer. James was out of bed in an instant, his rifle in hand. He moved to the window, pulled the curtain just enough to peek out. And there, at the ridgeline, he saw them. 5 riders, dark silhouettes against the morning's first glow. His stomach turned to stone. "They found us," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. James's jaw tightened. "Get the children to the cellar. Now." She didn't argue. She grabbed the nearest blanket, wrapped it around the smallest boy, and ushered them toward the trapdoor beneath the floorboards. James loaded his rifle, the sound of metal clinking filling the silence between heartbeats. Outside, hooves crunched over the frost. The men were close, too close. James recognized the look of them even from the shadow, bounty hunters. They weren't lawmen. They were the kind who worked for coin, not conscience. One called out, voice booming across the field. "Haru, we know what you're hiding." James stepped out onto the porch, his breath steaming in the cold. "You'd best speak your business," he said, his voice low but steady. The lead rider, a scar-faced brute with a leather coat, smiled coldly. "Name Sloan. We're here for the woman and her brats. Seems they ran off from someone who ain't too happy about it." James raised a rifle slightly. "Ain't no woman here by that name." Sloan's grin widened. "Funny, got a witness says otherwise." He motioned, and one of the men yanked something from his saddle, a red ribbon. It was Lily's. She must have lost it when she went for water yesterday. James's stomach sank. Inside the cabin, Lily clutched her children tighter. She could hear every word. Sloan dismounted, his boots crunching over frost. "Don't make this hard, Englishman. You hand her over, and maybe we let you keep breathing." James didn't move. His hands were calm, but his pulse roared in his ears. "You step 1 foot closer," he said, "and I'll send you to hell myself." Sloan chuckled darkly. "That right?" He raised his hand. "Boys." The first shot came from the left flank. It splintered the porch beam inches from James's head. He dove behind a water trough and fired back, the blast echoing through the valley. One of Sloan's men cried out and tumbled from his horse. The triplets screamed from below. Lily held her hand over the youngest's mouth, tears streaking her cheeks. The gunfight tore through the dawn like thunder. Bullets tore bark from the trees, shattered the window, and filled the cabin with smoke and dust. James's shoulder burned where a shot grazed him, but he kept firing, methodical, precise. Sloan ducked behind a stump, reloading. "He's bleeding out," he shouted. "Rush the house." James heard the hose pound forward. He waited, then fired the moment the first rider cleared the fence. The man dropped instantly. 2 left. James muttered under his breath. The silence that followed was sharp and terrible. Then came a soft voice from behind. "Mr. Harrow." It was Lily. She was standing in the doorway, clutching a small revolver James hadn't known she carried. Her face was set, her eyes burning with a quiet fury. "I'm not letting them take us," she said. He shook his head. "Get back inside." But before he could stop her, she fired. The bullet caught one of Sloan's men in the thigh. He screamed and went down. Sloan roared, turned his rifle on her, and James moved without thinking. He stepped into the open, pulled the trigger, and sent Sloan sprawling backward into the dirt. Then silence, just the sound of his ragged breathing and the faint whimper of the children beneath the floorboards. James lowered his rifle. Smoke rose from the barrel. The air stank of gunpowder and blood. Lily's knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the floor. "It's over," he said softly. "It's over now." But he was wrong. A final shot cracked from the tree line. James staggered, clutching his side. He dropped to one knee, blood seeping through his shirt. The last man, half hidden in the brush, was still alive. Lily screamed, grabbed the fallen rifle, and fired wildly until the gun clicked empty. Then she ran to James's side, hands trembling. "Don't you dare leave us," she whispered. He tried to smile through the pain. "I've been through worse." His voice was thin, but there was warmth in it. "You get them safe, Lily. Promise me." She shook her head, sobbing. "No, we'll get you help. You'll be fine." He touched her cheek weakly. "You've already given me more life than I had before you came." The light in his eyes flickered. Outside, the wind carried off the last of the gun smoke. Then nothing but stillness. By afternoon, the sheriff from Redstone rode in after hearing gunfire from miles out. What he found was a battered cabin, 3 frightened children, and a woman with eyes that had seen too much. She buried James behind the cabin, near the oak tree that overlooked the valley. A month later, the snow began to melt. The triplets played in the yard again, still quiet, but laughing more each day. Lily often sat by the grave, hands folded in her lap. Sometimes she'd whisper softly, as if speaking to him. "You saved us, James Harrow. You gave my children a future. I'll make sure they remember your name." Years later, travelers passing to the valley would sometimes hear a story told at the local tavern. about an Englishman who stood against 5 gunmen to protect a woman and her children. They said he fought like a man with nothing left to lose, and maybe that's why he won. Lily never remarried. She built a small schoolhouse near the edge of Redstone, teaching other orphans to read and write. The triplets grew into fine men, quiet, strong, just like him. And sometimes, when dusk settled over the fields and the wind carried that low, mournful sound, locals swore they could hear it. The faint echo of an English voice saying, "You're safe now.